the outline. There are topics for this week. First topic is population. Second topic is sampling techniques. Third topic is sampling frame. Fourth topic is sample size. And the last topic is type of sampling methods. Look, what is population? A population can be defined as all people or items with the characteristics that one wishes to study. Right. Population concept is a population defined as the set of individuals, items, or data from which a sample is taken. From these photos, you can see the various of characters of people. It can be staff in an organization, users of a product, members of a group, and etc. Next, the target population. It is the group of elements to which the researcher wants to make inference with people who have some particular characteristics. For example, households, housing units, parts of an organization, and etc. Then, unit of analysis. Firstly, the major entity that you are analyzing in your study. It is the identity that you wish to say something about at the end of your study, and it is considered the focus of your study. A unit of observation is the item that you observe, measure, or collect while trying to learn something about your unit of analysis. For example, individuals, groups, company, and etc. Next, steps in sampling process. Step number 1, defining the target population. Defining the population of interest for research is the first step in sampling process. In general, target population is defined in terms of element, sampling unit, and time frame. The definition should be in line with the objective of the research study. For example, if a housing developer company wants to conduct a survey to ascertain the demand for its houses, it may define the population as all the potential house buyers above the age of 20 who are able to make a loan. Step number 2, specifying the sampling frame. Once the definition of the population is clear, a researcher should decide on the sampling frame. A sampling frame is the list of elements from which the sample may be drawn. Continuing with the houses, an ideal sampling frame would be a database that contains all the households that have a monthly income above Ringgit Malaysia 3,000. A sampling frame errors when the sampling frame does not accurately represent the total population or when some elements of the population are missing. Step number 3, specifying the sampling unit. A sampling unit is a basic unit that contains a single element or a group of elements of the population to be sampled. In this case, a household becomes a sampling unit and all potential house buyers above the age of 20 or who are able to make a loan become the sampling elements. Step number 4, selection of the sampling method. The sampling method outlines the way in which the sample units are to be selected. The choice of the sampling method is influenced by the objective of the research. Availability of financial resources, time constraints, and the nature of the problem to be investigated. All sampling methods can be grouped under two distinct heads. There is probability and non-probability sampling. Step number 5, determination of sample size. The sample size plays a crucial role in the sampling process. There are various ways of classifying the techniques used in determining the sample size. In non-probability sampling procedure, the allocation of budget, thumb rules, and number of subgroups to be analyzed. Importance of the decision, number of variables, nature of analysis, incidence rates, and completion rates play a major role in sample size determination. In the case of probability sampling, however, formulas are used to calculate the sample size after the level of acceptable error and level of confidence as a specific. Step number 6, specifying the sampling plan. In this step, the specification and decision regarding the implementation of the research process are outlined. Suppose the household are the sampling elements. This step outlines the modus operandi of the sampling plan in identifying potential house buyers based on specific characteristics. Step number 7, selecting the sample. This is the final step in the sampling process, where the actual selection of the sample elements is carried out. This step involves implementing the sampling plan to select a sample required for the survey. Then we look to the sampling frame. Sampling frame is a listing of all elements or cases in a study population. Based on this diagram, shows the coverage of a target population by a frame. A target population element that is in the sampling frame is covered. For under coverage, is the fraction of the total population not covered by the sampling frame. Meanwhile, for ineligible units, those elements in the sampling frame that are not part of the population or total population. So, what is concept of sampling frame? A sampling frame is the list of accessible members of a population. Okay, for example, the alumni of a university are all those who has attended the university in the past. Okay, then what is population and what is a sampling for this case? The reason they cannot be enforced might include lost contact detail, die, determine privacy, move to another country, and refuse to participate. Next, sampling frame issues. For your information, a sampling frame is perfect if there is a one-to-one mapping from frame to population elements. What kind of sampling frame issues? They are duplication, clustering, and outliers. First, duplication occurs when multiple frame elements map to one total population elements. Second, clustering occurs when multiple total population elements map to one frame element. Lastly, outliers. An outliers is an observation in a set of data that is inconsistent with the majority of the data. Right, sample size, subpopulation. The subpopulation to be studied in order to make an inference to a reference population. A broader population to which the finding from a study are to be generalized. The larger the sample size, the more accurate the finding from the study. Then, the comparison of sample size. If your sample size is too large, your study will be difficult and costly because you need to meet all your respondents in different locations. Next, time constraint. You need more time to complete your data collection. Lastly, loss of accuracy. Meanwhile, if your sample is too small, even a well-conducted study may fail to answer each research question. It may fail to detect important effect or association. It may associate this effect or association imprecisely. So, the use of formula for sample size calculation and power analysis, we can know how big or small our sample size. It depends on three things. They are the estimate prevalence of the variable of interest. Second, the desired level of confidence. Lastly, the acceptable margin of error. So, to calculate the minimum sample size required for accuracy in estimating proportion, the following decision must be taken. First, decide on a reasonable estimate of key proportions, P, to be measured in the study. Second, decide on the degree of accuracy, D, that is desired in the study. Usually 0.01 and 0.05. Third, decide on the confidence level, Z, you want to use. Usually 95% or 1.96. Fourth, determine the size N of the population that the sample is supposed to represent. Lastly, decide on the minimum difference you expect to find statistically significant. So, this is formula to measure the sample size for population above 10,000 and equal to Z square PQ divided by D square. N for desired sample size and Z for standard normal deviation, usually set at 1.96, which corresponds to 95% confidence level. P for proportion in the target population estimate to have a particular characteristic. If there is no reasonable estimate, use 50%. Q for proportion in the target population not having a particular characteristic. And D for degree of accuracy required, usually set at 0.05 level. For example, if the proportion of a target population with certain characteristic is 0.5 and Z statistic is 1.96 and we desire accuracy at 0.05 level, then the sample size is N equal to 1.96 square times 0.5 times 0.5 divided by 0.05 square, N equal to 384 respondents. Right, if the study population is below than 10,000, this formula to calculate the sample size for population less than 10,000. NF equal to N divided by 1 plus N divided by N capital. NF for desired sample size when study population below than 10,000 and desired sample size when the study population more than 10,000 and capital N equal to estimate of the population size. For example, if N were found to be 400 and if the population size were estimated at 1,000, then NF will be calculated as follows. NF equal to 400 divided by 1 plus 400 divided by 1000. NF equal to 400 divided by 1.4. And lastly, NF equals to 286 respondents. So, how to use of ready-made table for sample size calculation? Let's look to the red box. This table shows that for error equal to 0.1 and confidence level of 95%, a sample size of 385 would be needed. For your information, this table can be used to calculate the sample size, making the desired changes in the relative precision and confidence level. If the level of confidence is reduced to 90%, then the sample size would be 271 respondents. Okay, type of sampling method. They are probability and non-probability. In probability sampling, every element in the population has a non-zero probability of selection. The simple random sample in which each member of the population has an equal probability of being selected is the best known probability sample. In non-probability sampling, the probability of any particular member of the population being chosen is unknown. The selection of sampling units in non-probability sampling is quite arbitrary, as researchers rely heavily on personal judgment. Right, first we look to the probability. They are simple sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. First, simple sampling. The sampling procedure that ensures each element in the population will have an equal chance of being included in the sample. There is simple sampling. Next, systematic sampling. In systematic sampling, only the first unit is selected randomly and the remaining units of the sample are to be selected by a fixed period. It's not like a random sample in real sense. Systematic sampling has confidence points of heavy improvement over the simple random sample. As example, the systematic sample is more equally complete to the complete population. The execution of the method is very easy, less in cost and conveniently to use in case of a larger population. Then stratified sampling. The usefulness of dividing the population into subgroups or strata was member are more or less equal with respect to some characteristics. Lastly, cluster sampling. When the total area of the research is too large, a better way for the researcher is to divide the area into smaller parts of the same or equal and then select randomly from the smaller unit. Next, non-probability. They are quarter sampling, purposive sampling, volunteer sampling, and convenient. First, we look to the quarter sampling. Selection of members in this sampling technique happen based on a preset standard. In this case, as a sample is formed based on specific attributes, the correct sample will have the same quality found in the total population. It is a repeat method of collecting sample. Second, purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is known as judgmental, selective, or subjective sampling. Reflect a group of sampling techniques that rely on the judgment of the researcher when it comes to selecting the unit. For example, people, cases, or organization, event, piece of data that are to be studied. These purposive sampling techniques include maximum variation sampling, homogeneous sampling, typical case sampling, extreme case sampling, total population sampling, and expert sampling. Each of these purposive sampling techniques has a specific goal, focusing on certain type of units, all for different reasons. The different purposive sampling techniques can either be used on their own or in combination with other purposes sampling technique. Third, volunteer. This type of sampling occurs when people volunteer their service for the study. In psychological experiments or pharmaceutical trials or drug testing, for example, it would be difficult and unethical to enlist random participants from the general public. In this instance, the sample is taken from a group of volunteers. Sometimes, the researcher offers payment to enlist respondents. In exchange, the volunteer accepts the possibility of a lengthy, demanding, or sometimes unpleasant process. Lastly, convenience sampling. A convenience sample is simply one where the units that are selected for inclusion in the sample are the easiest to access. In our example of the 10,000 UC student, if we were only interested in achieving a sample size of say 100 students, we may simply stand at one of the main entrance to campus, where it would be easy to invite the many students that pass by to take part in its process. Right, here is references that you can